I will share my audio and we can let everybody in.
Hello, Lou. Good to see you. I'm going to ask you to unmute and we'll
And
change your name.
and you are Todd?
I am Todd. Very nice to meet you. Thank you so much for
Me too,
coming on our
gentlemen.
program.
My pleasure to be here tonight.
We're starting up right now. We're going live. Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our VBC Happy Hour for January 29th, 2024. My name is Todd DiPastino. I'm the Executive Director of the Veterans Breakfast Club, and this is our weekly program, VBC Happy Hour. Tonight, we're sharing the immortal story of the Four Chaplains of World War II, 81 years ago this week. Four chaplains, two Protestant, one Jewish, one Catholic, gave their lives so that others might live. When the SS Dorchester went down in the icy North Atlantic near Greenland on February 3rd, 1943. And people have been sharing that story just about ever since. It's been one of the most, I would say, inspiring, um, one of the most inspiring stories of service I think any of us have ever heard. And to help share that story with us is a true expert, somebody who's dedicated his life to the four, or a big part of his life to the Four Chaplains, and that is a retired surface warfare officer, Captain Lou Cavaliere. Good evening, Captain Lou. How are you?
I am great, thank you. How's everybody tonight? And
Good.
thank you for making the distinction that I was a surface warfare officer and not a chaplain, because everybody thinks that I'm a chaplain because I'm with the chapel of Four Chaplains.
That's
So
right.
very good distinction. Thank you, Todd.
Hey, you know what? We're pros here, Captain. At the Veterans Breakfast Club. Every once in a while, blind squirrel finds a nut and says something right. After much talking as I do, I make a lot of mistakes. So it was good to get that right. Yeah, Captain Cavalier is a, I guess you would call him a chair emeritus of the Chapel of Four Chaplains in the Philadelphia Navy Yard and the Four Chaplains Memorial Foundation. So he's dedicated himself a lot to the story and to the legacy of the, and that's the thing, it's not just a story. There's a legacy, a heritage that we all can be a part of, and I think we all should be a part of in one way or another. And we're going to share and talk about that story this evening. First, I do want to let people know, if you're new to the Veterans Breakfast Club, that we are a nonprofit here based in Pittsburgh that creates communities of listening around veterans and their stories. And our mission is to connect, heal, educate, and inspire through sharing stories of service, like the story of the Four Chaplains, both on our online events, like we're doing now, and our in-person events, which will begin here in Western Pennsylvania at the end of March. We also do it through our publications, VBC Magazine, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We send those magazines out quarterly. And you could join our community and become a member with no charge of the Veterans Breakfast Club by going to our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org. So do visit us, veteransbreakfastclub.org, to check out our programming. And our programs, one of the ways that we keep the lights on here at the Veterans Breakfast Club and keep things going, and we've been doing this for 15 years, is through sponsors. And we do have two wonderful sponsors that support the programming that we do, and we're very grateful to them. One is, of course, tobacco-free Adagio Health. Adagio Health provides health, wellness, and nutrition services here in Pennsylvania and also in West Virginia. And their tobacco-free program is dedicated to preventing tobacco use and reducing tobacco use, educating people about the hazards of tobacco use and vaping, and advocating for safer places to live, work, and play. So we're very grateful to Tobacco Free Adagio Health. You can find out more about what they do at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. That's tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And if you are a smoker and are looking to quit, you could check out their quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. That's their 1-800-QUIT-NOW. That's free counseling to help you quit smoking. We also are sponsored in 2024 by UPMC for Life, and we're very grateful for their support of our programs. They're a part of UPMC for Life is a UPMC healthcare Medicare program, and UPMC for Life can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that is right for you. UPMC for Life offers a wide range of affordable Medicare Advantage plans, and military veterans can save money and get more benefits with their Medicare plans. UPMC for Life has plans that were designed by veterans for veterans. You can view all their plan options and compare costs and find out more about the benefits by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. That's upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. We also have Glenn Flickinger with us this evening. Hello, Glenn. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you, Todd. Good to see everybody.
Glenn is the host of our Masters of the Air series, which is every Thursday night at 7 p.m. It runs for 10 or 11 weeks. Do you remember 10 or 11 weeks?
We need to talk about that, Todd. The first 2 episodes dropped last Friday, and it surprised me. I didn't think about it until just the week before that they were going to do 2 episodes at once. So
yes.
Yeah. And, we've got so many potential guests. I imagine we'll have a couple of episodes about Masters of the Air after it's over.
Yes.
Because we can have Don Miller on after it's over, who wrote the book. We can have John Orloff on, who's the screenwriter, probably after the episodes are over. So I think we'll go at least another 9 or 10.
Okay, at least another 9 or 10. And our next one is coming up on Thursday night, the 1st of February at 7 p.m. And we are having the wonderful John Luckadoo on.
We had John on a couple of years ago, and he told his whole story. It was just after this book, Damn Lucky, came out by Kevin Maurer, who's just a wonderful writer. He's not necessarily a World War II historian. In fact, he's not. He'll tell you right out he's not. But he is a very good storyteller and focuses on history of all different types. And Lucky is a very special man. He's become well known since then. More well-known than he was before, not just because of us, but because of this series, Masters of the Air. And he was there. He was there. And 102, for those of you who have not heard him, the man sounds like he's 65 and has the memory and presence of a much younger man. So, yeah, he was there. And he was there in the 100th Bomb Squadron, which is the bomb group, the 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody 100th, and he was there for most of the 43, 44 timeframe that a lot of this series is covering.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And our thought for Thursday night was that we would talk about this series with those people who have seen the first 2 episodes so far. What do you think? Do you give it a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or somewhere in between? And would love to know a little bit about the history behind these first 2 episodes that I think many of us here have seen, but you don't have to have seen it to enjoy the conversation on Thursday night with Lucky Luckadoo. Lucky has seen it already. I think seen the whole thing, so he'll be able to let us know, what worked for him and what didn't. That should be an interesting conversation.
I'm really looking forward to this. He's a very special man.
Okay. Glenn Flickinger is in sunny Florida, so we won't keep him from the great outdoors, whatever he's doing in Florida nowadays, as we shiver here in Pittsburgh. Glenn, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Todd. Look forward to Thursday. Bye-bye.
Okay. Hey, I want to go right to Lou. Lou, here's my thought for this conversation this evening. I think that normal protocol would have like you talk about you and maybe talk a little bit about your work with the chapel, and then get into the story of the Four Chaplains. But let's do this in reverse. I think, we have some people who maybe need to be like me, need to be reminded about some of the details of the story of the Four Chaplains. So if you wouldn't mind, Lou, kind of walking us through what happened on February 2nd, February 3rd, 1943. And then we could get into what makes this such a compelling story for you and the work that you do with the Memorial Foundation.
Okay, that's fair, Todd. And I think that you opened up and said that the purpose of the Veterans Breakfast Club is to connect, heal, educate, and inspire.
Yeah.
And that comes out of this story that I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
Because it's directly related to what happened on the early morning of February 3rd, 1943. But back up a little bit to January. The ships left New York. They loaded in New York, Staten Island, Naval Station, Staten Island. If you ever take the Staten Island ferry into New York or into Staten Island and look to the left, the pier is still there from where they left.
Wow.
So they loaded 902 people on board the USAT Dorchester. There we go. Thank you. So the Dorchester was a ship that was built in Newport News, which is still a functioning shipyard, as you know, in 1927. It was classed by the American Bureau of Shipping, of which I am very involved with because I'm on their classification committee. The Dorchester, as you can see from that picture there, is an ocean liner that went down the coast of the eastern United States from Boston all the way down to Jacksonville, stopping off at various ports, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and ended up down in Jacksonville. That particular picture that you're looking at there was given to us by the Jacksonville Maritime Museum. So you can see there, it was an ocean liner that was designed to carry about 400 people. But it was a coastal ocean liner, so it wasn't really built for ocean deep sea service. But nonetheless,
and I'm sorry, Lou, I just want to interrupt. It wasn't enormous. I think I'd always pictured it as like the Queen Mary, but it was nothing on the scale of that kind of ship. It wasn't that huge of a ship.
No, it was not. These were not, well, they didn't have, this was a coastal liner, so it was not really designed for deep sea service. And consequently, it only carried about 400 passengers. And there may be another crew of about 100, and that was that. So now you see the Dorchester as a gray hull, and they put gun mounts fore and aft on it because it was requisitioned by the Army. As difficult it is for me to say, this was not a Navy ship. It was an Army ship. USAT stands for United States Army Transport Dorchester.
Oh,
and it was
okay, got it.
USAT, right. And it was converted that way into a troop ship. So you went from, now it's able to carry 902 people because you can always squeeze GIs and sailors into a lot of small spaces than you can paying passengers going from north to south or south to north. So at any rate, the Dorchester, as you see right there, still not a big ship, painted the hull gray, which because now it was run by the War Shipping Administration, and the U.S. Army took it over. It was crewed by merchant mariners, which is another interesting thing because merchant mariners were heavily involved in World War II and did not really get the full credit. It was only until recently that they were permitted veterans benefits if they served in World War II, and permission to join organizations like the American Legion. But at any rate, they were merchant mariners. There were about 120 of them on this ship. There were about 500 GIs, Army and Army Air Corps, because they were going to Greenland to build an air base, and that's why the Air Corps is involved. And we had the Coast Guard involved because they were a communications element involved, and they were handling the communications on board because they were screened. The whole convoy was screened by by 3 Coast Guard cutters. So we have Army, Army Air Corps, Merchant Marine, Coast Guard, Navy Armed Guard. Because they have gun mounts on here now, they needed the Navy Armed Guard on there to operate those gun mounts. And we had a crew of about 35 of them. And we also had about 100 civilians on board because the civilians, carpenters, electricians, were going to Greenland to build the facilities for this airbase. So the end result is that there were 902 people on board, including 4 chaplains. Now, the 4 chaplains, I'll focus on them later on in the story. But the 4 chaplains were an experiment because the 4 chaplains were from different faiths. And the chief of Army chaplains at the time thought that it would be a great idea to mix a Jewish chaplain, a Catholic chaplain, and 2 Protestants and send them to a base in Greenland that was going to do a lot of the air cover. If you recall, Greenland is practically in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So from there, we can do a lot of air cover to protect our ships from the submarines. Submarines are very, very difficult to find. I was involved in that when I was in service, and they called ships that I was on targets. So if there was anybody in the audience who served on submarines or on surface ships for that matter, you know what I'm talking about. But once you found them, the best way to track them would be using aircraft. And that's what we would have to do. We'd have to call into position. Aircraft will come out and drop sonar buoys. But in the case of World War II, we didn't have sophisticated sonar buoys at the time. But in order to do things, these diesel U-boats would have to surface a lot, and airplanes can detect them better than you can from a ship, and also attack them from the air a lot better than you can from a ship. So the end result is that the Dorchester, which was built in 1927 as a commercial ocean ship, was now a U.S. Army transport. Originally built to carry about 400 passengers, now had 902 people on board, and it was on its way to Greenland. Now, I think I saw a question, Todd, pop up in the chat. I don't know if you want me to address those now, or well, I hope we'll have time for questions later.
Oh, yeah, no, feel free. We certainly will have time for questions and discussion later. But if you want to address a question in the chat now, please do feel free to do so.
Well, is it relevant? I don't see it.
Oh, well, we have things in the chat because people are very chatty. Our folks are very chatty,
Okay,
but
good.
not necessarily a question. So I'll let you know if one is relevant that does pop up. And I do want to encourage people, questions, comments, corrections. Chad Riddle is always correcting me for all the mistakes I make. Hey, Sean, yes.
Ben Wright asked, were all four chaplains Army or other branches of the U.S. Armed Forces?
Oh, I didn't see that. Thank you.
Excellent question. And they were U.S. Army chaplains. They went to school at the U.S. Army Chaplain School. At the time, it was in Harvard University. So all of those who visit Harvard University go to the chapel there. The Harvard University Chapel is an old, beautiful building. And on the wall, you will see a plaque dedicated to the four chaplains who were educated there at that school.
Wow.
And then from there, they went to Camp Miles Standish, which is also in Massachusetts, and they received further training before they got orders to go to the Dorchester. But all four were U.S. Army chaplains. That is correct. But I want to tell you that Todd and the person who answered the question, asked the question, that all branches of the service that have chaplains, which is the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, the Marines and the Coast Guard use Navy chaplains. All branches respect and honor the four chaplains as their own. And I can tell you that from personal experience. And that's a whole other story. I don't want to get involved with that now. But yes, they were all Army chaplains. And most of the GIs on board were Army Air Corps. But at that time, that's who serviced the Army Air Corps. So we're on a voyage now that's going to take us out of Staten Island on a ship that was really not built for the service, but it was okay for the service because it had already made 4 trips to Greenland. This was its 5th voyage. And of course, this was the fateful voyage. Now you can see on the little chart there that that Todd has posted, it went from New York actually to Boston and stopped off in Boston. And that's where they formed a convoy. And the convoy was heading east, but the Four Chaplains convoy, which consisted of 3 merchant ships and 3 U.S. Coast Guard cutters, they headed north to St. John, Newfoundland. St. John, Newfoundland was the last port of call. And when they were in St. John, Newfoundland, they were permitted, all the GIs permitted to go off the ships and they exercised them basically because they had been at sea now for maybe a good part of a week. And some interesting things happened up there because when you put 500 GIs ashore in a small town at the time like St. John, Newfoundland, that could cause a lot of interesting interactions, which it did. One of which was that one of the people who did not survive posted a letter. And he posted a letter to his family from St. John, Newfoundland. The letter was postmarked February 14th. The sinking of the ship occurred on February 3rd. That family still refuses to believe that they lost their loved one at sea. because of the fact of the postmark on the letter. But we had it confirmed with the Army at the time that the person was indeed one of the casualties. So, at any rate, so we're in St. John, Newfoundland, and we're ready now to sail east and northeast to go to Greenland. On the early morning of February 3rd, 1943, they were about 100 miles out of Greenland. And that's when the U-boats appeared. And one of the U-boats, U-boat 223, fired 5 torpedoes. Now, how do we know that? We know that because we've since spoken to the U-boat commander of that U-boat, and also the Coast Guard cutter Tampa put it in their logbook that at least 2 of those torpedoes hit the starboard side of the Dorchester. So when this happens, and there were 3 ships in the convoy, which is interesting because I guess the Germans surfaced and figured out that this was a troop transport, and there's a type of a U-boat right there.
That's the type of the U-boat. I couldn't get a picture of the 223.
Yeah, actually, it's online somewhere. But at any rate, so this U-boat fired 5 torpedoes, 2 of which hit the starboard side. Now, when this happens, I don't know if any of you have served on a ship. If you have, you know what I'm talking about. If you have not, and you have been on a cruise ship, when a ship is torpedoed, you don't know how long you have before something's going to happen, like the sinking of the ship. Sometimes you could salvage the ship from a hit. But in this case here, the way this ship was structured and where the torpedoes hit, they immediately took on water and started to list and sink. Now, I have done studies on this extensively about the naval architecture of this vessel and why it sunk so fast. It sunk in 20 minutes. So in 20 minutes, you don't have a lot of time to decide what you're going to do. So let's set the scene here. The ship is sailing at about 10 to 12 knots in the North Atlantic. The sea temperature was 33 degrees. It was February, and the air temperature was 32. They were taking seas. And when that happens, the water freezes on deck. So you have icy decks. All of the rigging of the life boats get coated with this water. And what happens, they also freeze. And that comes into play because the ship was only able to launch 3 of 13 lifeboats because all of the rigging was frozen. So you have another thing that came into play there that added to this big disaster. So this ship is going 10 to 12 knots in very cold water, very cold ambient temperature. You don't want to be in the North Atlantic in the water in February. The ship started to list immediately and started to go down by the head. The structure of the vessel, they have these athwartships bulkheads on vessels for seawater, for seaworthiness. And unfortunately, where the torpedo hit, it punctured one of those bulkheads. So it made the flooding even faster. The other thing is that the flooding in the engine room caused the generators to immediately go out. So that means that you lost all of your electric power, and you have auxiliary power that comes on, which are these basic they're like hand-carried lanterns that they had all over the ship, and that's all they had because it was pitch dark. So you can imagine there's a loud boom, and then followed by a second loud boom. The ship starts to sink. Everyone in the engine room is practically killed. And if you're in your bunk down below decks, all of the lights go out. It was total chaos. And that usually is what happens. Now, chaplains and all of us in the Navy anyway are trained that when chaos occurs, you try to limit the chaos and get back to a normal keel. Well, what do you do when a ship is sinking and you don't know what's going on? You don't know you have 20 minutes. You could have had 10 minutes. You could have had a half an hour. You could have had several hours. You just don't know. But the GIs and everybody on that ship were trained that when something like this happens, you go to your lifeboat station. Now, if you've been on a cruise ship, the first thing that you do when the cruise ship leaves port, and many of you probably have been on cruise ships, is that the captain has they have a abandoned ship drill where everybody has to take a life jacket and go to their lifeboat station and muster there and try on the life jacket. And if you did, remember that every one of these life jackets has a light on it. And I'll tell you a little story about that as we go along. So the ship is in total chaos. The GIs were told the night before by the captain of the ship, who was a merchant marine captain. His name was Hans Danielson, who was an American, very experienced mariner. He told them that he thought that there were U-boats in the water, in these waters, and that they should sleep with their life jackets and their boots on. Well, if you're an 18-year-old GI on a hot, steamy ship in a very crowded bunk room, you're not going to do that. So many of these kids ended up coming out on deck, some of them not even wearing shoes, many of them without life jackets, total chaos, not knowing what to do. Is this ship going to sink or not? You just don't know. The four chaplains right away knew what was going to happen. Now here you have four chaplains of different faiths who were very, very close friends because they had been to the Harvard chaplain school and to Camp Miles Standish together. So they already had a bond, and they knew each other very well. The first thing that they did was they went to the stern of the ship because it was going down by the head. The stern was coming up, and they opened up a life jacket locker. Now, the four chaplains had their own life jackets on that they had from their staterooms. Life jacket lockers are out on deck in places where, if people need them, you can go there and get them. But you don't have enough in a life jacket locker for several hundred people. So the four chaplains opened up this life jacket locker at the stern of the ship. And they started handing out life jackets to all these frightened GIs who were coming out on deck, not ready or prepared for the cold weather and to go over the side into 33-degree water. But the four chaplains gave them a life jacket out of this life jacket locker, and they started to encourage guys to go over the side. Now, not all of them did. We have reports from survivors that many of the guys just froze at the handrails because they were afraid to jump. And Lord knows what happened to those individuals. So what happened, they start giving out life jackets. The ship is listing and pitching more now. And the life jacket locker is now empty. They've run out of giving out life jackets. Now, this is where the story becomes very amazing. And there were 230 survivors. 672 went down with the ship, unfortunately. But almost every one of the 230 survivors have confirmed this. When they ran out of life jackets, the four chaplains looked at each other, didn't say a word, and they just took off their own life jackets and they gave them to the next GI in line. Now, how unbelievable is this? I often ask myself what I would have done in that situation. And maybe all of us here tonight should ask that question. Will we have the guts or the energy to seal your own fate by giving away the thing that was going to save you in the water to somebody else so that they can live? And that's what they did. And they didn't say, the Jewish chaplain didn't say, will the next Jewish person come up to me and take this life jacket? Well, the Protestant chaplains didn't say, is there a Protestant around? Let me give you my life jacket. The Catholic chaplain didn't say that either. They just gave it to the next guy in line. No questions asked about religion, ethnicity, nothing. They just gave it to the next GI in line. And then, now the ship is starting to pitch even further and going down by the stern, by the head rather. And the stern comes up out of the water. So now you can see the propellers for those in the water. And the four chaplains linked their arms in prayer. And remember, you got two Protestants, a Catholic, and a Jewish chaplain here who were not normally doing this, but they did this because they knew that this was their fate. And they went down with the ship. The ship sunk in 20 minutes. Now, while all this is going on, there's lots of chaos. There's a picture there of the four chaplains after they had given up their life jackets, and they're in prayer. There is the deck is awash with water. That picture and a lot of this artwork that Todd is showing tonight is at the Chapel of Four Chaplains at the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. We have lots of paintings there to depict all this. So, at any rate, there's lots going on here. The Coast Guard cutters that were screening the convoy knew that the Dorchester was hit, but the other two ships just kept going straight. it was the doctrine at the time that when something like this happened, not all ships broke course and looked for survivors. It was up to the screening ships to do that. But the Tampa, which was the lead Coast Guard cutter, was looking for, with its sonar, trying to find this submarine. And the other two, the Escanaba and the Comanche, the two other Coast Guard cutters, were looking, didn't immediately start looking for survivors, but after about a half an hour, they broke through. And when they realized that the German submarine was no longer around, and they started picking up survivors. Now, how long do you survive in 32, 33-degree water? And it's amazing because some of the survivors have told us that they were in the water for about 8 hours and they survived. There was one in particular, Ed Dion, he was on a life raft. And they started out with about 8 people on this life raft. They were in the water for 6 or 7 hours. And I mean, we're asking RGIs to do a lot for our country then and even today. And they had to watch at least 4 of these guys just drift away because they just died while they were in the water and they just froze and they expired and went. We expect a lot of our GIs. We expect a lot of our sailors and Marines and all of them. So the other thing I want to mention is that while one of the survivors mentioned that while he was in the water, a lot of oil was leaking from the ship because where the torpedoes hit, they hit the oil tanks and there was black oil in the water. And that was actually a good thing because it coated some of their bodies with some insulation from the cold. It wasn't a complete cure, but it helped. And one of the survivors told us that he looked back up at the ship as it was going down and there was still guys with their hands frozen on the handrails and would not go into the water. And they went down with the ship. And they were the Four Chaplains at the stern, and they went down at the very end. And they were the last to go in, and I was told that the propellers just came up out of the water and in it, and down it went. Wow. The other thing that the survivors have told us was that the sea looked like a bed of roses. And the reason why was because, remember that life jacket that I told you about has a light on it? Those lights are red. And there were so many life jackets, so many GIs in the water with life jackets that one survivor said it looked like a bed of roses. Now, can you imagine this? It's pitch dark outside. There's a ship going down, and they had this image of roses from all of these lights. As a result of all of this chaos, only 3 of the lifeboats were launched. So the chances of survival, if you were not in a lifeboat, was even less. And I want to tell you also, these life jacket lights are very meaningful because we have 2 of those lights from 2 of the survivors at the chapel in our exhibit case because they're so meaningful to these 2 men who obviously felt that they were saved by that. Because when you're in the water for 3 or 4 hours, everybody starts to disperse. And when the Coast Guard cutters came by and started picking people up, it was that light that really identified you, was really able to see you, because these lights, even though they're red, in the dark Atlantic, any ocean, in the dark, they will shed a big light. I remember from my own experience, we had to pick up a man who went overboard on one of the ships that I was on, and it was a pitch dark in the night. And the only reason why we were able to pick him up was because somebody had the good sense to throw a life ring into the water that had a light on it after this guy fell in. So, at any rate, so you have a sea of roses. You have Coast Guard cutters now coming in to start picking up survivors. And they only picked up 230 survivors. It was the Escanaba and the Comanche. The Tampa was still trying to look for the submarine, for the U-boat. You can imagine the chaos here because at the time, nobody knew who was alive and who was dead. And the picture that you're now seeing there is one of the lifeboats in the water, and that's a Coast Guard cutter, Comanche, picking up survivors. Now, there was a gentleman, and the Coast Guard did a lot of heroic acts that night in picking up these survivors. There were several gentlemen who saved more than one person by going into the water. Coast Guard cutter and Navy ships have what we call rescue swimmers. So these are guys that are trained to go into the water. There's a Comanche right there. These are guys that are trained to go into the water, and they tie a rope around them, in a sling so that we don't lose them, and they go in and try to save people. Well, the Comanche and the Escanaba had those kinds of personnel on board. There was one individual on the Comanche by the name of Charles David, who was not trained as a rescue swimmer. And Charles David, as you can see here, he was African American. So at the time, the only job that he could have in the Navy or the Coast Guard was as a cook or a steward, which was an unfortunate circumstance at that time. Well, this guy here was from Long Island, and Charles David told the captain that he was a strong swimmer, and he volunteered to go into the water. And because of all of the chaos, the captain of that Coast Guard cutter Comanche allowed him to do so. Charles David went in and he picked up at least 6 other people and saved them and brought them back to the net and got them up on board the Comanche, and they were able to get those guys out of the water. He was responsible for at least 6 of those. The Comanche picked up at least 90 people. And the unfortunate thing about Charles David is that he was exhausted after doing all of this physical effort, and he caught pneumonia, and he died 3 weeks later in Greenland. Like I said, we expect a lot out of our people. So the Coast Guard, in its wisdom, many years later, about 10 years ago, they started a new program where they were commissioning all of these new Coast Guard cutters. And one of them, I'm very happy to say, is named after Charles David. And when they commissioned that vessel in Key West, which is where it's homeported now in Florida, we had a crew, we had some of our board members go down there for the commissioning of the vessel to see the family of Charles David, and interestingly, to see the family of 2 of the people that he saved, who would not have been there if Charles David didn't save them. So there was a lot of heroism that night, in addition to this heroic act of giving up your life jackets by the Four Chaplains. And the ship obviously went down, but the Coast Guard cutters finally made it to Greenland the next day. They sent aircraft out to look for more survivors, but they didn't find any. And we ended up with 230 survivors and about 10 others who eventually did not survive in hospitals in Greenland. Now, I find this very interesting. The ship sunk on February 3rd, 1943. About a week later, the War Department sent telegrams to all of the people who were on board the ship, their families, and they told them that you have a loved one who was on the Dorchester, and right now his status is missing in action because we don't know whether he survived or not. That was February 3rd, 1943. These telegrams, many of which we have in our archives at the chapel in the Navy Yard, these telegrams went out around February 6th. So they're missing in action. And it wasn't until April 20th where they were finally able to sort out. Now, remember, April 20th, I mean, we didn't have the instantaneous communication then that we do now. April 20th, they sent out telegrams and chaplains to 230 homes across the country to tell them that their loved ones survived. And then the 672 that they were definitely killed in action. So 230 families got the news that their family, that their loved one on board the Dorchester was no longer missing in action, but he survived and he was now in Greenland, safe either in a hospital or recuperating somewhere there. I have met several of those survivors. There are no longer any with us, but when they were alive, not only did I meet them, but we interviewed them and talked to them. And we have many of their interviews on tape, but I have all of their testimonies on paper. Almost all 230 survivors gave us a testimony. And every one of them confirmed, well, almost every one of them confirmed the story of the Four Chaplains giving up their life jackets. And they also said something very interesting. When the ship, after the ship was first sunk, the Navy had an investigation into the sinking because at the time, when 672 people went down, this was the heaviest loss of life in World War II up to that point at sea. So the Navy did this investigation and asked all these 230 survivors to write out what happened. And they wrote out their testimony about what happened that night. And basically it went like this. They were in their bunk. They heard this explosion. The lights went out. They got up without realizing where they were going. They went out on deck. Some of them had life jackets on. Some did not. Most did not. And then they eventually made their way over the side. And they were picked up by a Coast Guard cutter. Some 2 hours later, some 6 or 7 or 8 hours later. But all of them wrote that it was like I was here at point A, went to point B, got over the side, ended up on the Coast Guard cutter. Very, very factual, matter-of-fact testimony. 20 years later, for the chaplains that were still with, for the survivors that were still with us, we asked them to write the same thing. What happened to you that night? And every one of them, without exception, took a different approach. They said that I was here with my friend after the ship was torpedoed, trying to figure out how to get out in the dark, some in places where there was water filling up and some not. And my friend went one way and I went the other way. I survived, he did not. Why me? Every one of these survivors were having dreams about this. They were having what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder. Every single one of them. And I was just so, I was not amazed by it, but I was so struck by it that we could have this affect people, even though you would have expected all these guys that survived the Arizona, all these guys that survived the Dorchester, they led normal lives with an asterisk. And the asterisk was that they would never forget what happened that night. And it also affected their families. So you had 230 survivors whose families were affected by all this because they now had to deal with the issues. And we had 672 families that were now Gold Star families. A Gold Star family is, as somebody just wrote survivor's guilt, and that's correct. They, in addition to post-traumatic stress, very, very severe survivor's guilt. And I know that today, well, back then, the reason why the chapel of Four Chaplains started was to minister to the survivors and their families and to the deceased families. We still do this today, not so much with the families that were on the fort, that were connected to the Dorchester, but with all that's going on with our veterans coming home and with all that's going on with them with survivor guilt and with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, we are right there in trying to get them help. And that's one of our programs. Now, Todd, when you opened up, you said that your organization connects, heals, educates, and inspires. And that's exactly what we do. That's the story of the Four Chaplains. If it wasn't for the chapel of Four Chaplains, maybe that story would not be around as vibrant as it is today. If it wasn't for the American Legion, who celebrates this in a big way. I'm down here in Florida, by the way. I'm not in Philadelphia tonight. And I'm down here in Florida because yesterday we just had a big ceremony with the American Legion Department of Florida here in Fort Lauderdale to celebrate the lives of the Four Chaplains and the sacrifice of the Four Chaplains. The American Legion has given us great support, and they've also helped us to carry on this tradition. So how do we connect like you connect, Todd? We connect with our Legion of Honor program, where we give out medallions to recognize ordinary people who do extraordinary things like the Four Chaplains did. Now, not all of them will have given up their life jackets to save somebody, but they did something with their personal life jacket to help somebody big time. And we want those people to be recognized. So every year we recognize about 400 people, not only nationwide, but now in Europe and in Korea and even in Vietnam. We've connected in all of these places. Heal. How do we heal? Well, this is the biggest mission that we have right now. And I know how difficult it is with your involvement, Todd, and with your organization in getting veterans to heal. But when you suffer traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, when you see your fellow GIs go the way they went, you will have survivor's guilt. And we try to heal veterans. Our biggest outreach program is to veterans. We get calls almost every day from a family. Usually it's not the veteran who calls, from the family who's dealing with the issues because they want help. They want some peace in their family. Can we help this individual? And a lot of times these veterans are not connected with the VA, are not connected with the benefits that they should know that they have, but they don't. And we get them into those right avenues and programs. Our healing program, or what we call our Veterans Outreach, is probably our biggest program. I mean, here I am at my age, retired, and I'm collecting socks in a sock drive for veterans that we have every year. I'm collecting ditty bags with personal items in it, shaving cream, soap, for homeless veterans and for veterans that are living in facilities that need this stuff. This past year, November, we ended our drive. We collected over 3,000 pairs of socks. We collected hundreds of ditty bags. And we had a truck come from Rhode Island that delivered us 2,500 winter coats. And every one of these items, all of that material, we were able to distribute in about an hour to all these different veterans organizations that came by to get these things, because they know that they need them. They know that these are going to help somebody somewhere. So for any of you who contributed a sock, a pair of socks, or a ditty bag item, those items are right now in the hands of somebody who not only needs them, but they're using them. And that is our second program. 4 programs of 4 chaplains. We connect through our Legion of Honor program, we heal through our Veterans Outreach, and we educate through our scholarship program. Every year, we have a scholarship program where we ask children from 5th grade through high school to write an essay on selfless service. Not only something that mirrors what the 4 chaplains did, but something in their own lives. And we come up with these really, really tremendous essays from these kids. And we give them cash prizes. We give out a total of $5,000 every year. It's a nationwide program. If you have a child or a grandchild who is in 5th grade through high school, connect the chapel, ask for a scholarship application, have them write the essay, send it in. We evaluate it. We pick out the best ones. Last year, our top essay came from a high school student in Alaska. So that's how far-reaching this is. But that's what we do to educate, because we need our young people to know what happened on February 3rd, 1943. Not only was there a tragic sinking where 672 people lost their lives and 230 people are now experiencing survivor's guilt, affecting over 900 families, but also the fact that the 4 chaplains gave up their life jackets and went down with the ship. They need to know this act of selfless service. And this is our final program. Our 4th program is our chaplains program, which is how we inspire. Our chaplains outreach program, or our emergency chaplains outreach, is what we do is we have chaplains in Philadelphia that train emergency responder chaplains all over the country. Most of your fire departments in your local towns have chaplains, and they are not trained as ordained ministers. So what we do is we train them in the intricacies of being a chaplain. And we also have an emergency chaplains corps that we send out when we are called upon for chaplains. That recent business that happened in that island in Hawaii, our chaplains were there. At 9/11 in New York, we dispatched over the course of that year over 50 chaplains from the Philadelphia area to go up there and help with the healing of all that was going on at Ground Zero. Our emergency chaplain corps, our emergency chaplains have been called out to the big bridge in Philadelphia called the Walt Whitman Bridge, where somebody was up on top trying to commit suicide by jumping into the water. And we were called out because we were told he was a veteran. So we sent our emergency chaplain corps up there to see this poor guy who was desperate, at the end of his rope, willing to jump, and we talked him down. Now, he was not a veteran, but he was the father of a veteran who was killed in Afghanistan. So you can see there how far-reaching this happens, how people totally black out because of a loved one who went, in this case, was killed in Afghanistan. And the circumstances of that were very horrible, which probably led to this person's really getting desperate and trying to kill himself. So all of our 4 programs, the Legion of Honor, the Veterans Outreach, the Education of Children with our scholarship program, and our chaplains emergency training and emergency chaplains program, all of them are designed to do exactly what you guys do. We're doing the same thing, Todd. We're connecting, we're healing, we're educating, and we're inspiring. And this brings me to my final comments, and then we'll take some questions. All of this is a legacy on our shoulders. And we like to have everyone sharing this legacy of this tremendous story about 4 people giving up their life jackets, this tremendous story of self-sacrifice, of selfless service, because there are acts of selfless service going on everywhere in the country. And that's why we recognize that by giving out over 400 of these awards every year. The legacy is what keeps us going. And we are a nonprofit organization. We don't get government funding. We're in the Navy Yard at the old Naval Station Chapel, but it's now a commercial building. It's not a government building anymore. So we have to keep all of our four programs funded. I came to the chapel 10 years ago. There's a good friend of mine who's online right now by the name of Joe Griffiths, who runs a program in Philadelphia, in New Jersey rather, for veterans every Saturday at 2:00 in the afternoon. And he knows this story because I've told him when I got to the chapel 10 years ago, they were basically on fumes as far as their funding goes. And I basically told them that they really needed to shut down financially because it wasn't going to work. They just had enough money basically to take all these wonderful archives that we had and send them off to some museum somewhere. But then I looked at what was going on. I looked at these young kids coming in to see us and saying, my uncle, my grandfather was on the Dorchester. I want to know what happened to him. And we can pretty much tell from the person's name and what he did on the ship, what happened to that person, whether he survived or if he didn't, whether he, how he went down with the ship or where he went down. We have stories like these dispatching people to 9/11 or to the Walt Whitman Bridge in Philadelphia. And many instances like that, that we could not let die. And we couldn't let die all of this because it was a legacy that was handed to us. So that's when we started this 4 programs for 4 chaplains. And I want to tell you that the first 2 years I was there, we had losses. 1 year, 80,000, the next year, 70,000. We couldn't sustain that. But we kept our programs going, and our programs just went crazy. They went wild. They went very, very busy. And the 3rd year is the year, because of a lot of people who were involved with us, is the year that we pulled finally had we're in the black for the year. And we've been in the black ever since, every year. Through a lot of help. American Legion, VFW, Jewish war veterans. These people are helping us tremendously, but basically there are individuals all over the country who realize our story, our legacy, and they want to help out. So we're located in the Navy Yard in Philadelphia, at the old Naval Station Chapel, right behind the Marine Corps barracks. I invite you all to come. If you're in the Philadelphia area, please call. If you are coming into the area, please come. We'd like to show you around, and a lot of the photos and pictures that Todd had posted earlier are on display in the chapel, along with the pictures of the 4 chaplains, along with the bronze tablets with the name of every person who went down with the ship, and along with a chapel on the side dedicated to the survivors with all of their names there as well. There are no longer any survivors, but their families still come. And we owe it to them. We owe it to these 672 people who gave their lives. We owe it to the 4 chaplains and their sacrifice. We owe it to Charles David for his saving all these people from the Coast Guard cutter. We owe it to the 230 survivors who basically had to go back to a normal life under very, very serious difficulty. So basically, Todd, I'm open for questions now, but that is the story, and I hope I've covered it all.
Yeah, man, were you good. What I would like to do, certainly we want to get into the characters and backgrounds of each of the 4 chaplains, who they were, why we think they were able to make that fateful decision on February 3rd, 1943. I also am glad that you recognize Joe Griffiths. He is the host of the long-running program on WIBG, AM, FM, in Ocean City, New Jersey, and Joe is the one who connected me to you. So, Joe, thank you so much for making this program possible. I'm going to ask Sharon Volpe, who is on this program, who is one of the family members of one of those killed, I should say, one of those 672 killed in 1943. Her great-grandfather was killed on the SS Dorchester, and I'd like her to talk about him. Andy Tybus, I know, is a chaplain, and I'd be very curious to hear, a retired chaplain, Navy and Air Force, I believe. And I'd be very curious to hear about how the Four Chaplains story kind of figured into his training and into his career. And then finally, certainly last but not least by any measure, we have 3 World War II veterans I know with us on today. We have Ed Cottrell, who just turned 102 years old. Hello, Ed. I see you down there in North Carolina. Good to see you as always. We have Julia Parsons, a U.S. Navy codebreaker. She's with us. She turns 103 on March 2nd. And we have Bill Balabanow, one of those people who was in the Merchant Marine that you mentioned, Lou Cavaliere. So I'd like to salute each of them. And if any of them has anything they want to share or questions they have about this. Oh, and also I want to say hi to Rick Gardner. Rick Gardner, good to see you, a Vietnam veteran. He is with the Fox Valley Veterans Breakfast Club, our fierce rival. We're going to have a big football game sometime, and where the Pittsburgh VBC goes up against the Oswego, Illinois VBC. And it's funny because I know the Fox Valley Veterans Breakfast Club. We share the name. I see their events come up in the in my Google alerts. And so, Rick, thank you for joining us. I'm glad that you did join us. And I want you to share something about your club down the line. Before we get to, I want to start with Sharon Volpe, maybe to talk a little bit about her family member. But Lou, I want to ask you a historical question. Were Americans aware of this disaster at the time? When was it disclosed?
That's a very good question, and it was disclosed shortly after the sinking.
Okay.
February 6th is when they started sending out these telegrams to all these people who had somebody on the ship, all of the families. So, and it was in newspapers right away, and it was played up as being the heaviest loss of life at sea, which it was at that time in World War II. It was later exceeded by the USS Juno in the Pacific, which was the one that had the 5 Sullivan brothers on it, and the
Right.
USS Indianapolis. Those had greater loss of life at sea. But that was much later in the war. This was really early on, and it really shocked the nation because there was such heavy loss of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Sharon Volpe, this was your great-grandfather.
That is Arthur, yes.
Your Private Arthur Inks. You obviously didn't know him, but are there stories about him in your family and is there a connection to this Four Chaplains story in your family?
Sure. He did die that night. I have no idea what the circumstances were behind his death. I'm assuming it was horrible and tragic, just like everyone else who did die that night. I, in my life, lived with his daughter was my grandmother. We were very close, and I lived with her for quite some time when my grandfather passed away. And then I also, sorry, there's like a party at my house right now. So I also had lived with his estranged wife, because when he stepped on the Dorchester that day, things were not going well with his relationship. And I also lived with his son. So there was quite a bit of conversation about him. But I knew something had happened during World War II, but it wasn't until I was going through some old records that I realized like how important the Dorchester was.
So they didn't talk, like your family members didn't talk about the connection he had with the Dorchester.
No. they knew that he had gone down. So the first telegraph that we have, that I still have in my possession, says that he was lost. There was something about North Africa. Like and it's in all the papers. If you do the search on newspapers.com or whatever it is, you can find all the stories where the newspapers reported that he was lost at sea around Africa. And that's like, they had no idea about the ship, or just, again, the Four Chaplains. And they knew that there was a memorial in New York for all the men who were lost at sea, but they did not know where it was. I was the first person in our family to see it.
Wow. And you can see, I'm sharing a telegram right here. You can see the date, April 17th, just like Lou said. So long after, more than 2 months after the disaster, the Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that it has now been officially determined that your husband, Private Arthur E. Inks, who was previously reported missing in action, lost his life. Wow.
Right, and that was all of February, all of March, and part of April. It's 2 months later. Amazing.
Agonizing.
Your family, Sharon, was on pins and needles for 2 months there.
Oh, I'm sure.
Captain,
I have met you a couple of times, and I have been to the chapel. I love the Mrs. Nolfi, who works in the main office there. I call her often to ask her questions. It's an amazing place to visit. I really couldn't recommend it more. There's so much to see. Like even the story about the teachers who won from South Korea. That's an amazing story that I've delved deeper into, because it's amazing that this organization recognized those women for what they tried to do to save those kids.
They were basically the Four Chaplains of Korea.
They were.
Yep. So Sharon, I think I do remember you. I think you came to one of our banquets.
I have come, but you have it on a Thursday night, and I teach on Fridays, so it's a little bit hard to get back to Pittsburgh in time.
Well, we'll connect, I'm sure, again sometime, and please come and visit us, and we'll see if we can dig deeper into what happened to your great-grandfather.
I would love that. Thank you.
I thought let's talk about each one of these remarkable chaplains, and we could start with Lieutenant George Fox. And I think one of the questions we want to address here is what gave them the character, the depth of character, the strength of character to sacrifice their lives in such a deliberate way on February 3rd, 1943?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer, and I get asked that question a lot. What was their motivation? And the only thing I can say is that it was their mission that they were carrying out.
Yeah.
And their mission and their ministry. Now, George Fox was from Vermont. He was in World War I. He was an ambulance driver. He was wounded in World War I. He got gassed. And then after the war, he recovered, and he became a United Methodist minister in the state of Vermont. He was also in the American Legion up there, and he was a state chaplain. He joined at when World War II started. He told his wife he has to go back. He was the oldest of the four chaplains, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And he went back in as a chaplain this time, and not as an ambulance driver. And the interesting thing about him is that his wife, Isadore Fox, wrote a book, which we have several copies of in the chapel. I don't know if you can still get it on Amazon or eBay or whatever, but which told pretty much of their relationship and what motivated him. And what motivated him was that this guy was a dedicated religious man. And the other interesting thing is that his church in Gilman, Vermont, was closed by the Methodist Church, because these things happen now in these days in these rural areas. Churches closed. Even in cities, they closed. But at any rate, the American Legion state of Vermont last year, and we helped them do this, they formed a nonprofit organization that were able to buy that church. And now it's being restored and turned into a museum in honor of George Fox, who served there as a minister for many years.
Oh, how wonderful. Now, I'd read a story about him, Lou, and you could tell me if it's true or not, that in World War I, he had given his gas mask to somebody during a gassing episode.
That's why he suffered from being gassed.
So that is true. That he kind of had a history of this kind of selfless behavior.
He was an interesting guy. He was a dedicated Christian. I really don't know
Wow.
It wasn't just Vermont. I didn't see that question. That last question just was about Vermont. I didn't see it.
Oh, Bill Confer asks, wasn't it Vermont that just decided not to celebrate Veterans Day anymore? Oh, I don't know.
Okay, I don't know
I
that.
don't know
I'm
that.
not gonna get in
Yeah.
there. That's a rough
Yeah.
question. But shame on them if they decided that. So anyway, now we have Chaplain Goode up. Chaplain Goode, Alexander Goode, was the Jewish chaplain. A lot of times when I tell the story of the four chaplains, I put their pictures up and I say, you can't tell who's who. You can't tell who's Jewish, Protestant, or Catholic.
Mhm.
And that's the way it should be. They were chaplains, and they're chaplains for everybody, not just people from their own denomination. So Chaplain Goode was originally from Washington, D.C. He was a very smart and educated guy, and he was also an athlete. When they brought the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier to Arlington Cemetery in 1921, which came over from France on the cruiser USS Olympia, which is still in Philadelphia, Alexander Goode was a young man who walked 30 miles to Washington out of respect to go to that ceremony for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in D.C. So there was the beginning there, you can see, of his faithfulness and his desire to do selfless service for others. So he was ordained a rabbi, and he had his congregation in York, Pennsylvania, which is where he left to join the Army in 1942. Alexander Goode is still remembered in York, Pennsylvania. They named an elementary school after him, the Alexander D. Goode Elementary School. It is also reported by one of the survivors who was going back into the ship's cabin there to retrieve a pair of gloves. And Rabbi Goode told him, here, take mine. I've got two pair. When he did not have two pair, he had one pair, but he gave his pair to this GI who needed it. And then he gave up his life jacket as well as the three other chaplains. Alexander Goode, Washington, D.C., York, PA, great guy. Okay, Clark Poling. Clark Poling's father was the chief minister at the Baptist Temple, Chaplain also Poling, in Philadelphia, Temple University. So that's why the Chapel of Four Chaplains started in Philadelphia, because of his father. His father was suffering from the grief of losing a child in the war. Clark Poling was a Dutch Reformed minister. He was married, had a young child who never, I've met his children and grandchildren. Of course, they never saw, she never knew him. And he was from the New York, Philadelphia area when his father had the Baptist Temple in Philadelphia. He was there, but he ended up becoming an ordained Dutch Reformed minister, and his parish was in Schenectady, New York. And that church is still there, and they still honor him. And we've had several of them come down to visit us also at the Chapel of Four Chaplains. Clark Poling did not want to go in as a chaplain. He wanted to go in because he said the chaplains did not carry guns, and that he wanted action. He wanted to serve in that way. And his father told him, he said, you're not going to be a coward, because the chaplains, which is true, have the per capita highest loss of rate among the services in the military. More chaplains per capita get killed than anybody else. And certainly that's what happened to Chaplain Clark Poling. Very interesting young man, another very solid citizen. And he also gave up his life jacket and went down with the ship.
Wow.
Okay, Father John Washington, the Catholic priest. He was from Newark, New Jersey. He grew up in a very tough neighborhood up there, big Irish family. And he decided to go to seminary right out of high school, which he did. Even though he was from a very tough part of Newark, he found his calling. So he served in a parish in Kearney, New Jersey. That parish, St. Stephen's, is still there in Kearney, New Jersey. They will have a big Four Chaplain service this Sunday. I think it's at 11 o'clock, as they do every year, in honor not only of their former pastor, but also of all of the Four Chaplains, which is what we have to recognize here. We're not recognizing one faith, we're recognizing one God. So Father Washington enlisted into the Army in 1942 from his parish in Kearney, New Jersey. He was the only one of the three chaplains who was not married. So trying to connect his family was one of the more difficult things we have had, but we have since connected with several of his family members, one of whom serves on our board. John Washington met the other three chaplains at the chaplain school, and he went off with the ship, and he had a very good voice, apparently, so we were told. And when the four chaplains went down together, they were all singing, and his voice stuck out. So another selfless act of service.
Amazing.
Amazing story here. They're all amazing.
They are all amazing. Yeah. And I want to invite people to put questions in the chat, to raise their hands through Zoom, or just, waving your hand in front of the mirror. While you are getting your questions together or comments together, I thought I would let you know about our program coming up a week from tonight, which will be February 5th. We're having Charles Person on. Charles is a Marine, a Vietnam Marine, Vietnam veteran. But he's also, before he went into the Marine Corps, he was a freedom rider. He was the youngest member of one of those cohort that rode interstate transit buses in the South in order to desegregate interstate transportation. He was attacked in Alabama. You can see the burning bus here in the background. He's going to tell us about what it was like to be a freedom rider and his activity in the civil rights movement, and then, of course, what it was like to go to Vietnam in 1965, 1966. We also have a podcast, Scuttlebutt, that was just released today. Sean, I know that this was a great episode, one close to my heart because it had to do with history of World War II.
Yes, definitely. I had Dr. Mitch Mackey on. He's from Go for Broke, which is a nonprofit in California, and their mission is educating people about the trials and tribulations of the Japanese Americans during World War II. Obviously, we know that there were camps that were created here in the States. And what happened to these families, the men that were there, the young men that actually did end up serving in the European theater and the Pacific. We get into that. We dive into that history, very knowledgeable, and we get through World War II, and then we talk a bit about how there was redress by the United States government, how that came about. We really, what we said, skimmed the trees at that point because we were short on time and there's a lot of history to get to. So what we're going to do is, this is considered maybe part one of our conversation with Dr. Mackey. He's going to join us for Asian American Month in May. He's going to come back and he's going to be on a happy hour. So I put the link into the chat. Please check it out. Really fascinating guy, great historian, and really very interesting story from him this week on the Scuttlebutt.
Right. I was just working on our next issue of VBC Magazine, which will be sent to the printer next week. You should be getting it then the week after that. I did not want to share the mock-up cover because I thought it would scare you because it's so bad. I don't do this kind of design. We have somebody, a real pro, who does this kind of graphic design layout work. And so we're getting that together. We'll be sending it, it'll be hitting mailboxes in 2 weeks or so. And I just want to invite anybody who wants a copy of this magazine. We send it out quarterly. You can receive it for free. Just send me an email, todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. That's todd@veteransbreakfastclub.org. Or you could just go to veteransbreakfastclub.org and sign up for our emails, add your address, and we'll make sure that you get a magazine. Finally, we want to invite people to take a survey. We've been getting really interesting survey responses. We learn a lot from them. We change up our program according to what we hear from you about how we could improve, what works, what doesn't work, whether you'll come again. Let us know. We'll put the link here in the chat, and it just takes 2.5 minutes to fill out. So thank you for doing that if you can. Let's ask, if we don't have any questions here, we might have some. Oh, Brad Washabaugh, let me see here. Let's I think I see
on here, Todd. Somebody with the name Patton asked, "Where was David buried?" I assume he means Charles David. And it's an interesting. I'm very interested to know why he asked that question, because he was buried in Greenland. But when we found out about that, many years ago, probably now about 15 years ago, I guess, we notified Charles David's family, and they had the body exhumed. He's now buried in the family plot in Long Island.
Oh man. So he
Yeah,
was buried huh.
There's a lot of dramatic stories here. So, Mr. Patton, or Mrs. Patton, whoever you are, thank you for asking that question. But I'd be curious to know why you asked it, because he was buried originally in Greenland and he was exhumed. And then there was another question down here.
Brad Washabaugh.
Yes, first of all, when I listened to the amazing story, I thought back to our 40th anniversary of the Beirut bombing and how the chaplains there, regardless of their denominations, came together to care for the wounded and the grieving. And I think that was a link maybe from the past to the present for the chaplains. But I guess my specific question was, were any decorations awarded to the chaplains that went down to Dorchester?
Okay, very, very good question. And I see that, Brad, you asked that question in the chat, and thank you for asking that. So they got the Distinguished Service Medal and a Purple Heart. All the military on board the ship obviously got a Purple Heart. And then many years later, in 1960, the last day of the Eisenhower administration, Congress passed a law which Eisenhower signed, and we have the pen that he used to sign it at the chapel in Philadelphia. He signed into law a public act which awarded the four chaplains a special medal for selfless service and heroic action. That was the only time in the history of this country where Congress ever did something where they awarded a medal for heroism to anybody in the military. And the four chaplains got that in 1960, the last day of the Eisenhower administration. So those are the military decorations that they received. And if you look at I wish I had a copy of my challenge coin with me, because on the reverse of our challenge coin, the obverse is the picture of the four chaplains, but on the reverse is a picture of that medallion that they were awarded. And we have a copy of that medallion in our archives and display case at the chapel in Philadelphia. So very good. Thank you for that question.
Larry Obrist, you said your namesake uncle was a Catholic chaplain in World War II.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'm worried about my mic. Yeah, he was a part of the National Guard, and they were sent to what became the Louisiana maneuvers for 1 year, and they were to be discharged, and then the war broke out. So we ended up with part of that, ended up in California, and his service was actually in the Aleutians. But I found on his discharge, he, to my surprise, that part of the training cycle was at Harvard. And so he then ended up actually almost 5 years in the military. But one of the earlier questions was, yes, the military demands that the church or the organization of the chaplain be an ordained, educated person for their military cycle to be in the chaplain's corps. But yeah, I wish he died young at 63. I wish I had learned more of his military time directly from him.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be very curious to hear also what chaplains, those who have served as chaplains, think of this story. Don Patton, did you want to add anything? Oh, we don't hear you. Oh, I have to ask you to unmute.
How about that?
There you go.
I just wanted Lou to be aware at Fort Snelling here in Minnesota, there's a chapel that was built in 1929, but one of the stained glass windows is a Four Chaplains window, and there is at least one Sunday service every year that is dedicated to the Four Chaplains. Were you aware of that?
Yes, we were, and there are services all over the country this weekend in honor of the Four Chaplains, in memory of the Four Chaplains and their selfless service. There are so many. That's why I'm down here in Florida right now, and our executive director is coming down. He's got one in Jacksonville next week. We got several in the Philadelphia area later on this week. We have our banquet on Thursday night. But I want to tell you that that Fort Snelling window is a beautiful window. And there was a ship, by the way, named the Fort Snelling. But there are chaplain windows, roads, parks all over the country dedicated to the Four Chaplains. At last count that we did, there were over 400.
400.
Roads, chapels, and a lot of stained glass windows.
A lot of stained glass windows I've seen, yeah.
And many, many, not only military chapels like the one at Fort Snelling, but also in regular parish churches. There's windows to them. It's really an amazing thing. And people keep on coming across this, and they send us pictures. Just like that stamp. Now, somebody just put, Bill Confer wrote, "I'm a stamp collector," and there were a stamp commemorating the Four Chaplains, and that's correct. There was a 3-cent stamp that was issued in 1948 that has a picture of the Four Chaplains and the Dorchester going down by the stern. They got it wrong. It should have gone down by the head, but that's okay. The fact that they issued the stamp is more important than anything else to commemorate their selfless service.
And, you know, I'll add, U.S. postage stamps did a lot of education in the era when people actually, you know, mailed letters. Stamps were a way of getting a story out, of, you know, memorializing people, but also educating people, getting people curious. And I believe that this stamp probably did more to bring the story of the Four Chaplains to the public than anything except maybe the chapel.
It was a big help, and it was the Postmaster General in New York that was the one that was behind it. It was very good. And Mary Klepper has written a question: what is the criteria for someone to receive the Four Chaplains Award? My friend's uncle received one in Vietnam. Okay. The Four Chaplains Award, go on our website, www.fourchaplains, F-O-U-R, chaplains.org. And there is a whole section there on our criteria and how you can nominate somebody who has done selfless service. We like to say ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things. We want to hear their story, and we will recognize them because these people deserve encouragement and a huge pat on the back.
You know, one ordinary person who does extraordinary things all the time, and I'm going to just embarrass the heck out of him right now, is Ben Wright. He's served on the Veterans Breakfast Club board. He's a good friend of mine. He gives a great deal, not only to the Veterans Breakfast Club, but to other communities. He's also an ordained Episcopal minister. He's retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force and a pilot. If I were to survey everybody in this Zoom room here, Ben, who would give up a life preserver, you'd be number one on my list. Sean would be at the bottom, just above me. So Ben, I'm just going to ask you, as a religious leader, the story of the Four Chaplains, I mean, it's got to ring so profound to you.
Oh, yes. Well, it is because they gave of themselves. And that's, you know, at the heart of the teachings of Jesus. And so, yes.
Yeah. You know, I'm sorry, Lou.
I'm sure Ben has heard this story many times.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar with it, but it's always good to hear it again.
And that's it. That's you know, I've been wanting to say that. This is not a story you hear once and then catalog it and go on with your life. I think this is a story that has such significance that we need to hear it over and again. You know, like we go to church every week. We don't just one and done. You know, you go because you need to be refreshed and you need to be inspired continually. And I actually wonder, I have a theory, and I want Greg Yost to talk also if he has a minute, because he always has something interesting to say. I have a theory that may not be correct, but a theory I have is that people who are able to make such big sacrifices are people who have rehearsed an event like this in their heads, often years in advance. So in other words, there are people who have really thought, would I be able to sacrifice my life for somebody else if I were put in that position? And it's a question that they ask themselves. They think about it, and they decide at some point that they will be that person, whether they want to or not. And so when the time comes, they've kind of already done it. You know, they've already maybe rehearsed it. And that may be a crazy theory, but I think that's one of the things that it probably takes. Okay, no agreement out there, but
there's Mary Klepper also asked a question. How would my friend find out her uncle received the award for? And Mary, the answer is to call the chapel, 215-218-1943. We have a roster that goes back many years of everybody who's received a Four Chaplains award. Give us your uncle's name and the approximate time, and we can probably figure it out for you. 215-218-1943. 1943 being the year of the sinking of the Dorchester. So please call us, and we'll get that information for you.
Bob von Bargen, another retired Air Force officer. Does the Four Chaplains Chapel have an interface with active duty or Guard Reserve chaplains today?
Yes, we do. In fact, at our banquet on this Thursday night, we have the Chief of Army Chaplain. The Chief of Army Chaplains will be in attendance, and our guest speaker is the Chief Chaplain of the U.S. African Command, who's flying in from Africa to be with us to give her talk at our banquet. And in addition to that, we do lots of things, and we offer our pulpit to active duty chaplains all the time. We've even done some training with them. And we have our executive director also serves in Arlington Cemetery as a chaplain's assistant. So we're connected with them in that way as well. And we are connecting. We had the Chief of Air Force Chaplains at the chapel, and they did a whole big story on that. That's General Sojourn, and we had the Chief of Navy Chaplains, the Episcopal Bishop to the Armed Forces, who herself is a retired Marine Corps grunt, not a chaplain. She will be with us also on Thursday night. So we have lots of associations with active duty people.
Gary Glick, you received one of these awards. If you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, I did in 2018.
And where did you get it, Gary?
I got it in Northport, New York, Northport, in Long Island.
In Long Island. And where was the ceremony?
Northport in Suffolk County.
At the American Legion Post?
No. Northport VA Hospital.
Oh, Northport VA. Oh, very good. Okay.
Yes. I'll tell you something. After I won that, I got that award. I should say, not won it. I started doing more than I did before, because it was like a prestigious award, and it's something that it's amazing. It's all I could say is, and I go to schools now and I talk about it, and nobody listens. That's the sad part. And there was some other things with Rabbi Goode that we have a plaque that I found was hiding for 12 years. I sent you the picture of it. And it's amazing that I knew a guy in my area who knew Fox and the family. But I love that. That's one thing I can't stop talking about.
And you're not the first person that told me that their activity increased after they received the award. It's like a big incentive to keep going.
And sometimes you feel like quitting, but you can't. You can't, because you see so many people need that help.
And also stories like this. I mean, one of the reasons I think we need to keep telling the story of the Four Chaplains is because it emboldens and kind of equips all of us to make those sacrifices in our own lives when we can, when we see the need, like Gary has, be the one that goes out and serves. I think that's and sacrifices when necessary. Just an amazing story, and you're on a wonderful mission, Lou. I'm looking at the clock. It's 8:29. Our program stops in 1 minute. Oh, Bob Flage has a question. I wanted to ask you about what got you so interested in this story.
I'm a veteran, and I want to help veterans, and I've seen too much. I am a man of peace, and I'm a man of peace because I served. And I don't want to see our people getting killed or coming back maimed. And if they do come back maimed, or if they are killed, we want to take care of them or their families. And that's why I am doing this.
Got it.
And I am totally dedicated to that mission.
Yeah, that's pretty darn clear. Bob Flage, how are you in Jacksonville?
I'm very good, thank you. The pacemaker's still working, so
It's still ticking.
yeah. Oh, no, what I just wanted to mention, one of the good memories I have in Vietnam was dealt with a chaplain. We were in the field the week of Christmas week 67, and they decided they were going to send some hot food out to us. And lo and behold, a chaplain and his assistant came out on the chopper, and he had a service. But before he started to put on his stole, it's a white one, and I said to him, please, we just had contact that night in the area where we were staying, and he says, don't worry, son, we're all protected. And he went ahead and put on his service, and but that's, like I said, that was one of the more enjoyable memories I have of it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I did, Lou, put in the chat here, fourchaplains.org, fourchaplains.org. That is the website for the Memorial Foundation. So people can connect with you. And if anybody wants to connect with Lou or with the foundation, and you don't have his email or his phone number, we did share the phone number here in the chat. Contact me and I'll put you in contact with Lou. So please do. It's a wonderful organization that has been doing terrific work for a long time, and you could hear in Lou's voice that how dedicated he is. Lou, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
My pleasure. And I want to say, Todd, let's work together to connect, heal, educate, and inspire. That is so meaningful.
You bet, Lou. Thank you so much. And I just have to say, Lou did not talk about himself. And I regret that. I'm sorry, Lou. We're all about veteran stories. You're a veteran with this story, and we know almost nothing about you. But that is how I think focused you are on this story. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. I look forward to seeing you Thursday night. If you want to do another 90 minutes on Zoom, we're going to be talking about Masters of the Air with Lucky Luckadoo, 102-year-old B-17 co-pilot who survived 25 missions in the 100th Bomb Group. And then we'll be back again Monday night, 1 week from tonight, for VBC Happy Hour. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and see you.